thanks for joining me again. I hope you're enjoying Frugal Green Girls Gardening Week, where I'm putting out a new video on gardening topic every day this week. And since I usually put out about one video, a week, having one every day for almost the whole week is like more videos than I've put out in a whole month, all in 1 week. So hopefully you're not sick of me yet. But anyway, today I want to talk to you about blossom end rot. It's a pretty common problem with tomatoes and things like that, but there are some things that you can do to prevent it when you're planting your tomatoes, or if during the season you encounter that you have this issue, there are some measures that you can take to help prevent that from happening anymore. So, blossom end rot is basically, it's primarily on tomatoes, but I have heard of it on like peppers and I think eggplant, but for the most part it mainly affects tomatoes. But on the bottom of the tomato, so we have the leaves on the top and the stem, and then the tomato down here. At the very bottom of that would be the blossom end. Well, at the bottom where the blossom was, starts to rot. It looks like a black ring. Now, of course, it depends on how big the tomato is, how long it's been going on, etc. But if you ever see the bottom of your tomato rotten, you've had blossom end rot before. And again, there are some things you can do to prevent it. So I want to point out though that the tomatoes that have blossom end rot are still edible. If you cut off the bottom part where the rotten part is, the rest of the tomato is fine. You don't have to eat it, of course, but just in case you end up with these issues and you have a whole bunch of them with blossom end rot, it's not a loss. You can still cut off the parts that are not good and still use it if you prefer. Blossom end rot is caused by a calcium deficiency. Some people have said that it's a watering issue, when actually that actually funnels down into the calcium again. Because if you end up with issues with blossom end rot, and it has to do with watering, what the watering is doing is making the calcium unavailable. So yes, it could be caused by the water, but it's still ultimately that calcium issue. So a few things that you want to do when you're planting your tomatoes: make sure you rotate your crops. Tomatoes like to uptake a fair amount of calcium, and so if you put them in the same spot over and over again, they're going to end up with a calcium deficiency. So if you put them here this year, put them over there next year, put them over here the year after that, that way they can slowly take up the calcium from around the yard or your different garden beds, etc. And then you don't end up having one spot that has no calcium and then the tomatoes are rather unhappy. So rotate your crops is definitely a good thing you could do to help head it off in the first place. And then the second thing you could do would be to add calcium to your soil. So I did a video a while back on how to grow the best tomatoes, and of course I add calcium to my soil with that video because obviously tomatoes need a lot of it. So you can add calcium in a lot of different ways. You can do oyster shell, which is something that some people feed their chickens. So if you already have chickens, you could just put some of that in the dirt with your tomatoes when you plant them. The second thing you could do is just use chicken egg shells, excuse me. So when you use an egg, you can just, dry it out, crumble it up, and then put that in the dirt. That's my preferred method, just because we already have, eggs and chickens and things like that. So we're going to have tons of leftover eggshells. We might as well save them and put them in the garden. It just kind of keeps the loop closed, so to speak. You can also use lime, but be careful with lime because it will adjust the pH, but more about that in a minute. If you live in an area with a low pH and you're adding lime to the soil anyway, you will be adding trace amounts of calcium that way. And then if you already planted your tomatoes and you're having issues with blossom end rot, you can actually water your tomatoes with milk. Milk, of course, has calcium in it, and if you water your tomatoes with a bit of calcium, the calcium is already dissolved into the water, which can be hard for calcium to do. It's a mineral and it can be hard to dissolve, but if it's already in the milk, it's already dissolved, like I said. So it'll uptake into the plant very quickly that way. This is a little bit of a expensive solution though, because obviously milk can be a little bit pricey, but if you have only just a few tomato plants and it's really bad, it may be worth just throwing some milk in there. You can also use bone meal. Bone meal is also a fertilizer, and so a lot of people use it to add some different nutrients to the soil, but bone meal is actually made from crushed up bones, and of course our bones have calcium in them as well. So when you add bone meal to your yard or your garden, you will be also adding calcium that way. So there's definitely a variety of ways that should work with every gardener, regardless of your price points and things you're trying to achieve, and also whether or not you've planted them or not. There's some different things, obviously, like I said, that you could do to either add it at the time of planting, or if you've already experiencing that problem, to go ahead and fix it as it's already progressing. The second thing you're going to want to do, in addition to adding calcium to the soil, is making that calcium available. And the number one way to make that calcium available is to address your soil pH. Now I know that sounds a little bit complicated, but primarily tomatoes like the pH of the soil to be between 6.5 and 7. And when I first moved into my house here, I tested the soil to find out what the pH of the soil was. I found out it was too high, and so I knew every year I was going to have to be adding a little bit of amendments to the soil to keep the pH lower. So, and if you live in an area of the country or the world where the pH is lower than that, you may want to add something to raise it. So a few things that you could do to raise your soil pH would be, again, lime. So if you have, low soil pH and you add that lime, you're going to be adding something that's going to help raise the pH to make calcium available, and you're adding something to, add calcium to the soil. So it's, a 2-for-1 on that one. You can also add wood ashes. If you have like a fire pit or something like that and you burn wood, you can take those ashes and you can add them to your garden. And so that'll also help raise the pH level. And then for me, like I said, my pH is high, so I know a little bit more about this one, how to lower the pH of the soil. So some of the best ways that I have found to lower the soil pH would be compost. If you make your own compost, you can actually add eggshells to your compost, and so you'll be adding something that's not only going to help lower the pH, but you're also going to be making compost that has, calcium in it as well. So again, there's a nice 2-for-1. Plus, when you make your compost, it's free, so that's a good, choice right there. You can make compost with tea. Coffee is another good one. That cotton burr compost, as far as a compost that you can buy instead of just one that you're making, cotton burr compost is an acidifying compost, and so again, that can do a 2-for-1. You're adding nutrients to the soil using a compost, but then you're also lowering the soil pH, so that's a good one. And then peat moss. Peat moss has a lot of controversy, but I did just want to point out that peat moss is actually really good at lowering the soil pH as well. So, there's another choice available. And then another couple of things, you'll want to water regularly. That'll definitely help, your plants out a lot in just being healthy in general, but also, of course, helping to prevent that blossom end rot. And also you can mulch your tomatoes. When you mulch them, it makes it to where they won't dry out as quickly. But it's important to notice that when there's hot temperatures or things like that, your tomatoes can dry out faster, even if you've, watered them regularly, even if you've mulched them, and so you may end up with the issue anyway. So just keep in mind, again, that they're still edible if that happens, and even with your best intentions to help eliminate blossom end rot, you may still end up with some issues, with your plants anyway. But hopefully you can at least curb most of it in your garden. That way you don't end up with those issues.